I have just enough money for the phone. I saved up so much, so here's $20.
Well, it's only 15, so here's your change and here's your new phone.
Awesome! Well, I'm the consumer, and now I have a surplus of money of $5. Yay! Plus is when the consumer is prepared to buy an item at a certain price, but actually when they go to the producer, they have to buy it for a lower price. Therefore, the consumer has a surplus of money. In this case, I was prepared to pay $20 for the phone, but Aaron was actually selling the phone for $15, so I had a surplus of $5, and that's consumer surplus.
I should sell my iPhone 5 for $5. Does anyone want to buy it for $5?
Oh my gosh, I totally buy that phone for $200.
Well, here you go then.
$200 and change? Thanks.
Surplus is what the producer is willing to sell it for and what the market price actually is. So in this case, I was willing to sell my iPhone 5 for $5, but the market price was $200.
So, in our simulation there, I was goofing off and not doing any of my work while I was working outside, and then Aaron was sitting here diligently doing his work. Obviously, he was more efficient than I was in my time because he used his time wisely and used his resources, while I wasted my time and didn't use my resources at all, and that's efficiency.
Cost.
Cost. Now say I am a seller. I buy my product for $10. That's my cost, and then I mark it up and sell it for $15. So $10 is my cost in that situation. What is an externality?
An externality is a cost or benefit that isn't transmitted through the prices. Prices don't reflect the full cost or benefits of producing the product, producing or consuming the service or product. Producers and consumers won't bear all of the costs and will not receive all of the benefits. Too much or too little of the good will be produced and consumed in terms of cost and benefit for society. For example, steel. We have a steel company and the government imposes a tax because of pollution, which is an externality. And so we have our supply and our demand. And the tax is imposed, shifting the supply up, decreasing supply. So this is the private cost it costs to make the steel, and here's the social cost we have to pay because of the imposed tax. Next externality, for example, the smallpox vaccine. Here we have our supply and demand curve with our supply and demand. We shift the demand curve up because the social cost is greater, or the social benefit is greater than the social cost, making this a positive externality. Internalizing an externality means it occurs when an individual takes an environmental cost or benefit into account. These could be an imposition of a tax, property rights, selling rights to create externality, direct government regulation, and government regulation. For example, air pollution is a negative externality. The social cost is less of supply is greater than the private cost. So prices are going to increase, and to reduce that externality, the government, there are solutions. For example, incentives to use cleaner fuel, higher taxes on burning coal, money towards natural gas plants, and money for natural gas exploration. This causes an increase in the cost of supply, so demand will decrease.
Coe's theorem was coined by Ronald Coase. He actually won a Nobel Prize for it, but what his theorem states is that if there's trade in an externality, you won't have any transaction costs, and you will have an efficient product to sell, because no matter the cost of this product, you will always have an efficient product to sell, just because you're already selling the product that is creating this externality, and this externality is basically coming to you free. Like if you have a cow farm. So you have your cow, they produce milk and cheese, and you sell their milk and cheese. But what also comes with this cow farm is cow poop. And when you're dealing with cow poop, it's an externality. It's waste, so you have to throw it away. But actually, people like farmers will turn it into manure and sell it to people. So by having these cows that they've already paid for, they can take their waste that they don't need and don't want to use and sell it to people, because it's a positive externality and people need fertilizer for their plants. So that's the definition of Coe's theorem.
So deadweight loss is the total fall in surplus due to a market distortion. The most common market distortion is taxes. So here we have a supply and demand. Or let's say lanyards. So we have the equilibrium price at $7 and the equilibrium quantity at 10. The original consumer surplus is in this area right here, and the original producer surplus is on the bottom. When we add a tax of $3, the dynamic of the graph changes. So due to the tax, the buyers are now paying $8 for the lanyards, and the sellers are now receiving $5. The total tax revenue is in this dashed area right here, and the deadweight loss is in this shaded area. And this is the loss of gains from both the producers and the buyers.
So what does international trade look like on a graph? Well, here's the country without trade, and here's their equilibrium. If the country's price is below the world price, then they'll export. And if they export, here's the world price. The exports are right here. And so this is the exporting quantity, and this is the new world price. Now, if its price is lower, or higher than the world price, they are now an importer of that good, and this is the importing quantity, and this is the world price, and this is what it was before trade. And that's what international trade looks like on a graph. So how does international trade actually play out in the real world? Well, we've all heard about China. Here's an article about China and how the rules from the U.S. on China are getting a little bit tougher because they're a currency manipulator, lowering their prices in order to give themselves a competitive advantage, making them an exporter, which is a bad thing for the United States. However, here's an article in the New York Times talking about someone making plumbing parts and shipping them from New York to China. And this guy's making a lot of money because the Chinese markets will offer him more money because they're building new hotels that want higher grade plumbing, which is what he produces, which isn't found in China. So China will be an importer of the plumbing parts because their own production doesn't meet the standards that they want. And the third article is about the negative aspects of international trade because international trade has been accused of causing Earth's sixth major extinction event. International trade has caused humans to overfish our seas, cut down many trees that we have in order to trade away to different countries because we have plentiful amounts of wood, and also mine important minerals that has devastating environmental impacts. So environmental impacts is a bad part of international trade. But international trade definitely helps out companies because it gives us cheaper goods, especially in the United States, and we like cheap goods.
A transaction cost is a cost that you encounter after making an economic exchange. So let's say you go on the internet and you purchase an item. Well, the transaction cost that you're going to encounter for that is the cost of shipping. That's an extra cost. Or when you decide to buy stock from a stockbroker or have the stockbroker invest your money in stocks. You give them the money so that they will invest it in stocks. They're also going to take a portion of that as their commission because that's their job to invest your stocks, and that's what you're paying them for. So transaction cost is a lot of hidden fees sometimes, and you could also count a tax as a transaction cost. But that's transaction cost.
So welfare economics is the study of how the allocation of resources affects economic well-being. And it's basically the calculation of how much value the market creates for society, so for both buyers and sellers. So in a supply and demand curve, equilibrium maximizes the total welfare of both buyers and sellers. I'm not that smart. The consumer surplus measures economic welfare for the buyer side, and the amount of producer surplus calculates the amount of economic welfare for the seller side. So when when producer or consumer surplus decreases, that means that the welfare economic well-being also decreases, and vice versa. Jenna, how much are you willing to pay for this iPod?
Probably $5.
I'm willing to pay $20, but the market price is $10. See, this is our willingness to pay. I'm willing to pay $20 on the demand curve, and you're willing to pay $5, but the market price is $10. Our willingness to pay as a consumer is represented by the demand curve on a supply and demand graph.
Jeepers, you have taught me so much today, Alexa.
Corrective tax.
A corrective tax is a tax that tries to equal the negative externality. For example, cigarettes, there'd be a large tax on cigarettes to help combat the lung cancer and the different health concerns that it creates.
Now that we know the definition of a corrective tax, let's look at it on a graph. Now here we have the demand curve for cigarettes. And here's the price at $5, quantity at 10. Now the corrective tax will go above the price to here. And now here is the new quantity, that's 7, and the new price is also 7. So we're raising the price $2 and lowering the quantity. And that's what a corrective tax does.
Hey Jenna, hey Sydelle, I'm having a lot of trouble with my econ homework. Can you explain what equity is?
Yes, I can. Equity is the distribution of resources across a population fairly. So if I worked 25 hours and I got the Galaxy S2 for $125, and Jenna also worked 25 hours, and she
was only able to afford the Galaxy S1 because I make more than $6 an hour.